Hi and welcome back. My name is Estephania and you're watching Alkehmia Channel. Now for today's topic, this is something that has come up in casual settings as well as specifically in settings where we're talking about spiritual guidance, how to tune in and connect with ourselves. It comes up in circles where some people might have certain convictions or beliefs, and this topic came up around how we connect with ourselves from a place of honesty and truth. So being able to recognize and being aware how truthful we actually are with ourselves when we're going through challenging moments. What does this mean? So this topic is going to be around spiritual bypassing. So if you've heard this before, we're going to go through what that actually means, examples, and why it keeps coming up, or why it could be something that is detrimental to growth, especially when we're going through transformations on such a deep level, both in our bodies, in our minds, and then not only how it impacts us from an individual perspective or experience, but also how it impacts the collective or the communities that we're a part of. Now, spiritual bypassing is a word that probably has been thrown around here and there, probably something that you've heard of a little bit, probably that you've heard of in mainstream culture now. But essentially what this means is when we use, for this sake, I'll use story, or the story that we connect to our beliefs, our spiritual beliefs, in order to excuse behavior that isn't necessarily conducive to our growth, that isn't necessarily conducive in terms of creating a positive impact. This could be as simple as utilizing spiritual beliefs to normalize or excuse, let's say, aggressive behavior that is creating harm or violence towards people, towards those around us. So spiritual bypassing can be a means of normalizing inexcusable behavior, basically. Right? So any behavior that is condoning violence, that is normalizing and promoting aggression, harming people around us or harming ourselves in an act or a way that would get us to a higher state or a connection to something, whether it's a higher power or something bigger than ourselves, outside of ourselves. A way that this can happen, as I mentioned, is how we can normalize aggressive behavior or harm towards people as a means of, or as an excuse of, spiritual practices or beliefs without looking at our behavior itself. So it doesn't keep a person accountable for their actions by using story or that spiritual belief to mask or cover the behavior itself. Another way that this can present itself most often when going through spiritual awakenings can be by disconnecting or fragmenting our feelings, what are our sensations, what we're actually experiencing in terms of our emotions, and pushing them away by rationalizing or justifying through a spiritual belief or a spiritual practice. So by us disconnecting from our emotions, we're disconnecting from the experience itself, the experience of transformation or growth, right? So with challenge, oftentimes we are pushed either through external conditions or internal conditions in ourselves to grow in a way that can allow us to mature, allow us to release certain emotions, release certain beliefs or ideas, so that we start evolving into what eventually would be a mature adult. When we're not in tune with our body, right? So that's using very much a top-down approach. So we're intellectualizing, we're bringing in the experience from an intellectual part and then sorting it out, but not necessarily getting in touch to the emotion. How does it feel? What is the experience for you? So what is it creating in your system, your nervous system, your body, so that you can acknowledge at that point, well, these are the emotions I'm feeling, right? So it's love, sadness, fear. And then coming from a more holistic viewpoint, being able to bring that information, which feelings and emotions themselves are information. It's data that our body is bringing to us so that we can learn from that experience. So when we bring that in, then we're able to bring it into our brain or our mind and work with it from a place of wholeness. And in that sense, we're both honoring the body, what we may be feeling, and honoring the mind, right? What our beliefs are from that intellectual perspective, from that heart-based perspective. So it's what we know intellectually, and now how do we practice it in our life? So how do we come in contact with those feelings that we're feeling, that we're dealing with, so that we can put both of them together? With spiritual bypassing, what tends to happen is, when I talk about feelings or emotions or being in the body, we're going from a bottom-up approach. So that means getting in contact and in connection with our body to be able to hold the space for ourselves, to recognize what does fear do to our body, right? What does love do to our body? Sadness. So when we're able to tap into how that information passes through or becomes interpreted through our body, and we bring it up, we can then start connecting our mind to that experience itself and have that holistic viewpoint. With spiritual bypassing, when we feel perhaps an emotion that feels too overwhelming or too strong to hold space for it, a safe container, especially if we want to avoid going into that experience, is pushing it away, not actually feeling the sensations or the emotions in our body, and then going up into the mind and intellectualizing what may be happening for us, or justifying or rationalizing the feeling itself. So instead of attaching a story to it or dismissing our feelings, we're able to hold space. So this is and if you've seen my videos before, this is something I talk about, where we want to be able to just pause, slow down, so that we can breathe into our experience, or take the moment to slow down our mind, our thoughts, and really connect with what is our heart saying to us? How am I experiencing this? What am I feeling in my body? How is this coming through in terms of information, so that then I know, what do I need to do at this point, right? Do I need to take care of myself, go for a walk, listen to some good music? Do I need to write this out in a way that makes sense for me? How do I integrate, essentially, those emotions and those feelings and sensations that I'm experiencing? And this is what I want to come to. This is why art, as you probably are seeing me here painting and drawing as we're going through this, why art is so important, because art becomes a container where, based on how we come to this practice, can become a safe container for us to explore those emotions or those feelings that don't necessarily have a straight, very direct answer or solution. And we can go in through the art, whether that's painting for you, whether that's dancing, whether that's writing, whether that's singing, photography itself. Creating art is a way and a process for us to make meaning of what we're experiencing. So when we don't yet have those words to put to our experience, art is such a beautiful container and a safe way for us to bridge between that intellectualizing, rationalizing, justifying, and what the body may be feeling, the sensations we're experiencing at that moment. It also gives us the opportunity to clear our minds, what I call almost like taking off the weight of the experience, so that we can always come back to it from a safer, whether it's a safer distance, safer placement. It offers the ability for us to take it out of our mind, externalize it, whether it's putting it on paper, putting it out into a song, putting it out into dance or movement. And it allows us to give that space to ourselves so that we can then, depending on your spiritual practice, go in from a more, I don't want to say safer, it's not safer, but we go in from a place that is not as charged, and then we're able to look at it outside of ourselves instead of going within, which sometimes can be very scary. This goes back to being able to acknowledge ourselves, being able to acknowledge our truth on where we are in the experience and what's actually happening. How are we experiencing that for ourselves? And what's actually going on for us in that experience. So art has that beautiful capacity to hold us and bridge that experience for us when emotions might overwhelm us or take over, and we're not ready to go just yet to that rational place or that intellectual or cognitive place. Art becomes the bridge that allows us to walk and get to that space at our own pacing and our own rhythm. And that's a way that we can honor ourselves in the emotional experience, right? The human experience, which is part of what I talk about. Because we are human, it's part of our makeup. But art allows us to transition safely from that so that we can get to whatever the spiritual practice is that you're following, so that we can get to those spaces from, if it's connecting to that divine, if it's connecting to the higher self, connecting to a specific deity or belief system that works for you, we can safely do that because we've been able to honor and acknowledge our humanity through art, through using a safe bridge to walk that path. Now, I want to touch on implications that spiritual bypassing can have. Individually, if we're not honoring our emotions and if we're not acknowledging what we're feeling internally, that gets somaticized. And what that means is it gets stored in the body, okay? It gets processed in there. So when we bypass it intellectually, we're still holding the stress, right? We can say to ourselves, no, I'm not stressed, I'm all good. But if we keep meeting every challenge, as we keep going in life through shocking and stressing our nervous system, but we're not actually acknowledging it or taking care of it, but we're not actually acknowledging or taking care of our nervous system and of ourselves, that gets stored in our body. And that is something that if you look up in any research, you'll find that there's a high amount of research on how the body keeps those memories and stores those emotions that we haven't yet processed or cleared. So that's one way where I call it that residue of the experience. If it's a shock of an experience, if it's something that has been building up over time, if we don't take care of it and tend to it, right? Whether that's physically doing the art, reaching out to community, if that is not taken care of, we can rationalize and justify as much as we'd like in our mind, but our body is still holding a lot of the stress and the memory or the emotion of those experiences. Another implication of spiritual bypassing is, say if conditions change for a person. I mean, we just all lived this on a massive scale 4 or 5 years ago with the pandemic. But if our mental state is already on the edge, or it's fragile in a way that we haven't really attended to, and we haven't taken care of ourselves physically and emotionally, when we're spiritually bypassing our sense of self, as or the truth that we're experiencing in that moment, this can often lead to higher rates of mental health, because essentially, again, we're cutting off from acknowledging that experience and acknowledging what's going on for us from an emotional place and from a physical and sensation-based place. And lastly, the one I want to touch on is when community isolates or shuns people who, especially when you have, as a human, one of the highest human needs are the need to belong. And when your experience or transformative experience that you're going through, the challenge or the obstacle, tends to go against the grain and tends to go against the conventional wisdom of your spiritual community or the communities you may be in, and when that is no longer deemed logical or reasonable, that can create a lot of separation and gaps for a person's experience, right? So it's almost like saying to somebody, hey, if I say, I'm drinking tea right now, and you say, no, I don't see a cup in your hand, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's essentially negating their sense of how they're connecting emotionally and through their body to the experience they're having. So in denying or using spiritual beliefs to bypass somebody's emotional experience and what they're feeling through their sensations, when we stop acknowledging each other and when we stop recognizing each other for who we are, that takes away from our humanity, right? The basic human need is to belong, to connect with people. And when we don't offer people the time or the sense that we're listening to them or that we're seeing them for who they are, that can cut away from somebody's humanity. And so especially in spiritual communities, when you're going through your experience and it's no longer aligning perhaps with a spiritual belief or a spiritual practice, it's important to recognize how not only ourselves can have an impact on community, but how community can have an impact on us. And it goes back and forth, right? It's all connected. And so being able to honor yourself and recognize yourself, and that means whole self, for whatever you may be experiencing, acknowledging that it's okay to feel emotions and it's okay to feel sensations. This is information that your body is bringing to you, right? But first we need to acknowledge it, and then finding a safe container for it. So I brought, of course, as you know, art as a way, and there's many pathways for art that you can explore, because it allows us to make meaning, or make sense rather, and ground what can be very ambiguous when we're working with emotion or sensation. And that creates that safe bridge in order for us to get into that space where we can now connect it to our spiritual connection, or our spiritual belief and practice. So being able to work with art not only as an expressive practice, but also from a place of a meditative practice, allows us to intertwine and bridge between what can be so untangible, right? Feeling and the emotions, when we don't know how to respond to them or be able to recognize them. It allows us to get to a place or bridge to where we can recognize what that spiritual practice is. This is the beauty of art, not only from its expressive wealth, but its meditative wealth. It truly is a bridge that allows us to acknowledge our human experience, right? We are humans by nature. And then bridge us into those areas where we can connect and touch with, if it's divine, if it's source, universe, a specific deity, or a specific spiritual belief. It allows us to create that bridge so that we can acknowledge our full self for who we are. We are human, we have our experience as a human being, and we can also continue to walk towards that divine path that some of us may be actively or consciously walking at this time. So thank you for watching. That was our video for today. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with me. Otherwise, go ahead and click subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.